Welcome to a deep dive into a truly chaotic corner of the Roman Empire, Londinium, Britannia, AD 75. For this exploration, you really need to forget the glorious marble and, the monumental history of Rome itself. This dive takes us instead to a raw, developing, and frankly deeply volatile frontier town. It's struggling intensely with civil power, overstretched military oversight, and the sudden arrival of this aggressively modern criminal element.
Yeah, and our sources today, they're incredibly dense. They paint a picture not just of a political challenge, but, well, a profound kind of moral failure right at the edge of the known world. We're really deep in the weeds here. We're tracking two brutal, politically very sensitive murders. We're looking into a major organized crime syndicate, this so-called Jupiter company, that's attempting basically a hostile takeover of the entire commercial structure of this, let's be honest, pretty meager town. But I think most critically, we're delving into the complex, messy personal lives of the Roman officials who are actually tasked with fixing it all. The stakes here are, profoundly personal, even when they're dealing with these huge imperial consequences.
So our mission is precisely that, to extract the critical knowledge from this really complex web. We need to figure out who died, why those deaths suddenly became so politically vital to the governor's administration, and how the Roman law enforcement structure,
Yeah.
From Governor Frontinus right down to our key investigator, the auditor Marcus Didius Falco, and this mysteriously missing vigils officers, how they coped when the chaos they usually fought outside the walls, well, it invaded the capital city itself.
Exactly. And this exploration, I think it'll quickly show that even at the very edge of the world, sophisticated Roman-style corruption thrives. It's capable of exploiting the very vulnerabilities created by Rome's own expansion. Yet against that backdrop of, systemic failure, we also find resilience, fierce personal loyalty, and sometimes just sheer stubbornness holding the line when the system itself seems to be collapsing. So let's unpack this. Maybe start with the political and physical foundations, or maybe the lack thereof that Londinium was built on.
Okay, AD 75, Britannia. It's known across the empire as a hard posting, definitely. It's barely 30 years post-conquest. And that conquest, well, it was nearly reversed just a decade and a half earlier by the sheer horror of the Boudiccan Rebellion. That event left deep scars, a lingering fear back in Rome, and a massive military footprint here in Britain.
Oh, the expense alone is just staggering. Our sources confirm Britain still requires 4 active legions. 4 legions. That's more soldiers than any other province in the empire, including those, bordering Parthia or Germania. Big threats there, too. This massive expenditure really reflects Rome's enduring anxiety. They fear another native uprising, sure, but they also fear the political cost of failure.
Right. And into this high-anxiety environment steps Governor S. Julius Frontinus. He's an ex-consul described as cultured, straight, dedicated, but he seems preoccupied with the big picture, the monumental strategy, not day-to-day policing. So what exactly is his grand vision for the province?
Well, his vision is one of complete civil transformation. He wants to change the perception of Britain forever, really. His strategic focus, it's aimed at establishing 10 to 12 new semi-autonomous civic centers across the province, basically normalizing the occupation and embedding it. And his ultimate goal is to transform Londinium, which is his winter headquarters, into a full municipality. A proper Roman city with a colossal works program. He sees it as his duty, his mission to haul this marginal barbarian province, as they saw it, properly into the structure of the empire, not just militarily, but culturally too.
But this grand ambition, it's kind of shadowed by past administrative disasters, isn't it? If you look at the track record of governors before Frontinus, it's alarming. We have Suetonius Paulinus, formally reported to Rome for incompetence after nearly losing the province to Boudica. That's a huge black mark. Then, after the Civil War period, the province was temporarily run by a committee of military legates, just generals trying to run things, which is almost unthinkable administratively.
Exactly. And Frontinus's immediate predecessor, Batilius Cerealis, he was known for a long history of, well, the sources called them ludicrous errors.
Yeah.
The job itself, it seems to require more political connections than actual talent sometimes. It took a relative of Vespasian, Cerealis, just to get the job in the first place. So you have this constant rotation of people struggling to reconcile imperial ambition with the brutal reality of the British frontier. And that reality is difficult terrain, fiercely resistant tribes, and just internal administrative chaos. It's a mess.
So if the governor is focused on grand strategy and, dealing with the fallout from the past, who's left to handle the day-to-day administrative rot? The kind of stuff that allows a group like the Jupiter Company to even get a foothold.
Well, that falls largely to the procurator of finance, G. Flavius Hilaris. Hilaris is the straight man in this picture. He's the meticulous administrator, the one who's mastered the rules. He's described as an old lag in the province, a veteran of the invasion force itself. And now he's focusing entirely on finance, auditing, making the bureaucracy actually work. He and Frontinus, they're complete opposites. Frontinus is all about grand campaigns and building things. Hilaris is about making the numbers balance and ensuring the civil mechanisms function such as they are. And this split of focus campaigns over administration, that seems to be the first major crack the criminals exploit.
Okay, now let's talk security, because here's where it gets really interesting, right? The security problem is brewing right behind the lines of the campaign. In Rome, you have the vigiles, the dedicated fire and police force, but they're entirely absent from Britain, completely missing. So law enforcement duties, they fall to the soldiers, which leads to what our sources call a rough-and-ready kind of justice.
And these soldiers are, well, they're the definition of inadequate for policing a growing civil population. The military presence in the capital itself is mainly just a detached unit. It's for the governor's bodyguard and his staff. And they are housed in this chaotic mess on the Western Hill, described as worse than a marching camp, just individual barrack blocks scattered around without proper defenses. It really reflects how poorly the military integrates with the city they're supposed to protect.
And the command structure itself seems to be coasting. Centurion Silvanus, the one Falco had to get drunk just to get an honest assessment from. He seems representative of these internal issues. These centurions are described as just sound enough to coast along in a far-off province. They're competent enough to survive, maybe, but they lack the initiative or the focus needed for detailed policing.
But coasting means incompetence in a crisis, doesn't it? The Army's main command, they're preoccupied. They're focused on aggressive campaigns against the unconquered tribes out in the west, across the Sabrina estuary, modern Severn. And they're trying to manage the political fallout from the ongoing Brigantes civil war up in the north. That's a huge headache. So the Army is fundamentally stretched thin. They're dealing with external threats, leaving the internal capital, Londinium, poorly protected.
And the governor himself, he contributes to this lawlessness, maybe unintentionally, because he's frequently absent on campaign, setting up new bases, pushing the frontier. This leaves only a remnant of his guard behind for routine policing, which leads Falco to reflect, quite bitterly, that there's absolutely no point in the army pushing out in all directions if chaos is just raging unchecked right in their rear.
Exactly. That structural weakness, that lack of centralized, dedicated civilian policing is the central lesson the Jupiter Company learned and leveraged so effectively.
Okay, let's shift to the physical reality of the city itself. If you look at the map, Londinium is really defined by the Thamesis. It's vast, 1,000 strides wide at high tide, flanked by marshes and these reeded islands. Not exactly prime real estate.
And the infrastructure totally reflects the town's temporary provisional status.
Oh, I love the detail about the bridge. It's a wooden structure, right? Coming across from the main island at this weird, awkward angle. And everyone calls it either the permanent temporary bridge or the temporary permanent bridge, which just perfectly captures the Roman mindset here. So nothing is finished, nothing is guaranteed, it's all making do.
Precisely. The glorious permanent stone bridge, the one that's supposed to link up straight to the Forum for that splendid view and sense of permanence, well, it's planned for about 10 years' time, maybe. Everything is still just an approximation of Rome, a half measure, really.
And the civic center itself is equally rudimentary, isn't it? The Forum, located on the eastern hill, the intended heart of the city, it's little more than a four-sided enclosure. It contains a silent basilica, shops that are mostly empty, and the spanking shell of a solitary temple. It's all designed to project civilization, but it's completely empty of actual life.
Yet Rome insists on civilizing the area, and largely they do that by catering to the big transient population of traders and soldiers. They introduce taverns and bars, reflecting Roman social life. Because, as Falco observes, Britons, Germans, and Gauls, they don't naturally have this kind of street life with open-air food shops. It's not their custom. So as Falco puts it, this entire effort is Rome's big gift to the new province. We were teaching the barbarians to eat out. It's quite cynical. The economic life revolves around basic industry potters, tanners alongside major imports and exports operating from the wharves, which makes it feel less like a proper city and more like a high-value, slightly chaotic trading post, which is exactly why these organized criminals targeted it. It's where the money flows, however haphazardly.
Okay, so we have this politically volatile, administratively disjointed, structurally unfinished trading post. A real recipe for trouble. This unstable environment is the perfect backdrop for our first crime. Falco, who is technically here as an auditor, a financial investigator, he gets called in by Procurator Hilaris.
Yeah.
The very fact that the auditor is called in for a murder, that immediately tells you this is a political incident, right?
Yeah.
Not just some routine street crime.
Absolutely. They're called to the Shower of Gold Tavern. Not exactly the classiest Jerome, presumably. The victim is a man named Verovulcus. He's discovered drowned, brutally, arse up in the cask-lined water hole, which apparently serves as the local water source for the tavern. Grim. The centurion who responded first, a man named Crixus, and that's a name we'll definitely come back to, he immediately recognized that this wasn't a simple death. It wasn't just a drunken accident.
And the key detail, the thing that elevates this instantly, is the missing ornamentation, isn't it? The centurion spotted the white circle around the neck and the grazes where a heavy gold or electrum torque had been violently wrenched off. We really need to stress how vital that torque was.
Yeah, in tribal Britain, these heavy, twisted metal neck chains, these torques, they were worn exclusively by the rich and the well-born. They signaled high status, power, wealth, lineage even. So the missing torque, which Falco later estimates might date all the way back to Caesar's conquest period, instantly elevated this death. It went from a simple tavern brawl fatality to a profound political crisis that the governor would find extremely difficult to just brush aside. This was potentially the murder of a foreign noble, not some local troublemaker.
And Falco recognizes the victim immediately. He knows who this is. Verovulcus was tall, well-fed, had striking red gold hair, expensive boots, these dark blue trousers, and a plaid tunic. Very distinctive. And he habitually carried a long British sword, which is now also missing. Falco knew his secret. Verovulcus was supposed to be in exile, an exile sanctioned for murder.
Right, this brings us straight into the famous Novio Magus affair, which Falco had actually been sent by Emperor Vespasian himself to clean up previously. Verovulcus had been King Togodumnus's close confidant. Togodumnus was a key client king for Rome in southern Britain, and Verovulcus was overseeing this massive multi-million sesterces scheme, basically a huge construction project on the king's new palace at Noviomagus near modern Chichester. The tragedy occurred when Verovulcus killed the officially appointed Roman architect, a man named Pomponius.
It sounds like a massive geopolitical nightmare waiting to happen. But the source suggests the motive was almost petty, largely an artistic feud that blew up out of proportion over design features that King Togodumnus hated.
Pomponius, typical of perhaps some arrogant designers, knew exactly what the client should want. He wouldn't listen. So Verovulcus killed him, partly to install a more agreeable architect, but also maybe to reassert his own control as the king's liaison. It got out of hand. So Falco was sent in as the auditor, not just to fix the wild expenditure on the palace, but more importantly, to manage this fatal feud without upsetting the king. To keep the delicate, amicable relationship intact with the virtually independent king, Togodumnus, who was Rome's crucial ally in the south, Falco had to prioritize imperial policy over immediate, strict justice.
So an execution would have been legally correct for murder, but politically it would have been catastrophic. It could have alienated Rome's most important client king. So Falco engineered Verovulcus's exile to Gaul instead, kept him out of the way, smoothed things over with Togodumnus. This decision really highlights the hypocrisy sometimes inherent in Roman frontier rule. Civility often trumps strict application of the law. So Verovulcus's appearance back here in Londinium was an enormous risk for everyone involved, and now it's tragically realized in a tavern waterhole.
And what's fascinating is how the crime scene itself was compromised immediately, just adding layers of complication right from the start. The barmaid, Flavia Fronta, she claimed she found the body that morning and knew absolutely nothing. She insisted she only called the centurion because she realized, a high-status body like this couldn't just be ignored or dumped, it would be missed.
But the reality, which Falco and Helena Justina, his companion, unearths later when they investigate properly. The reality is that Flavia Fronta was the initial criminal here, driven purely by immediate greed. She was the one who spotted that incredible gold torque on the half-drowned man. Maybe he was still alive, maybe not. She brutally wrenched it off him. Then she hid this regal treasure, potentially worth a fortune, in a wattle wall panel at the bar. And then she lied, trying to deflect suspicion onto the rising threat everyone was starting to whisper about, the gang. The Jupiter Company. So the investigation starts not just with a murder, but with a chief witness who is actively deceiving the authorities and destroying crucial evidence.
Yeah, the problem isn't just that Verovulcus is dead. It's that his death occurred in a way that points towards a deliberate attack, possibly linked to this criminal underworld, and that threatens to destabilize the already tenuous relationship with King Togodumnus, all because of this antique piece of jewelry and the secrets Verovulcus carried.
Okay, so the stage is set. Falco is dealing with the political fallout of a dead client king's exile showing up where he shouldn't be. And simultaneously, there's this deeper systemic rot, the rise of organized crime, establishing itself right under the noses of the administration of Londinium.
We get a very telling distinction from Centurion Sylvanus, remember him? Speaking while drunk, probably the only time he's honest. He talks about the types of lowlife attracted to this frontier town. He describes Londinium as a magnet for the standard scum and inadequates. These are the drifters, the toss-spots with a warped personality, as he puts it. The losers who've maybe tried other dead-end provinces and now seek empty spaces and hardship. They're running from the law back home, or maybe just seeking some kind of suffering in the mist among the legendary woad-painted men. They're feckless, rootless, mostly harmless maybe, just annoying.
But Sylvanus issues this crucial warning. He talks about a different type now arriving. He says, the ones who come to prey on the rest, the ones who know exactly what they're doing. Falco is initially astonished by this. He confirms the existence of basic rackets, gambling, vice, petty protection stuff. That's expected anywhere. But he can't fathom why a sophisticated criminal entrepreneur would bother trying to muscle in on such a meager, cold, and inhospitable town like Londinium. This isn't Rome. The potential profits must be minimal, surely.
But this is where we see their sophistication. This new threat is highly organized and distinctly Roman, or at least Mediterranean. The core gang members are easily identified by their dark coloring and what Falco Riley calls Tiber embankment bone structure. They look like they belong in the Subura, not Britannia. And they integrate fast, they move into the rudimentary structures of the city, and they make extortion look like a normal part of the high life. They project status and danger rather than hiding in the shadows like common thugs.
And we quickly see the structure of the syndicate emerge. Sounds quite professional. It's run by two main, initially unidentified partners. They're supported by crucial enforcers. Pyro, described as the persuasive arsonist, nice title, and Splice, a different kind of persuader, the brutalizer. And their manager, Fixer, he's described as openly holding court at the Ganymede wine bar, making their operation base not hidden, but defiantly visible. That takes guts.
And this visibility leads us to their incredible branding strategy. This is a detail that truly sets them apart from your usual frontier roughnecks. Helena, Falco's sharp-eyed companion, she's the one who notices the pattern first. The gang targets commercial outlets, starting with bars' logical place but expanding rapidly to bakeries and other essential businesses. And all the wine shops they prey on have names linked to the chief deity, Jupiter. You've got the Shower of Gold, where Vera Vulcus was found, the Ganymede, the Semele, and the Cradle in the Tree. It's a theme.
Wait, hang on. The branding was mythological and useful for accounting. That's an incredibly sophisticated, almost corporate detail for a racketeering operation working out of a swampy frontier town.
Oh.
How does that contrast with, say, local Briton criminals? I imagine they're not using branding like that.
Not at all. This shows they are true professionals who have brought metropolitan efficiency, Roman efficiency, to the frontier. Falco dryly notes that this is a smart, intimidating move. It's useful for their own internal records, he jokes. File all signed-up Capone taverns under Jove?
Wow.
And it's terrifying to those who resist because it shows the gang's reach and their systematic nature. They're everywhere. And the mythological branding, it runs deep. The name Cradle in the Tree, for example, which Amicus the Torturer later explains, refers to the myth where the infant Jupiter was hidden from his devouring father Kronos by being suspended in a cradle between earth and sky. It reflects the pervasive reach and the untouchability the gang sought to project. They are everywhere and nowhere, just like the hidden god.
Their strategy, though, it quickly escalates beyond mere intimidation and clever branding. They need to demonstrate consequence, don't they, to make the threat real. The racketeering effort comes to a horrifying climax with the torture and murder of a baker named Epaphroditus.
Yes. Epaphroditus was brave enough, or perhaps just too stubborn, to stand up for his independence. He refused to pay the Jupiter Company their protection money. The consequences were designed brutally to break the will of every other small entrepreneur in Londinium. He was beaten to death. The sources say he suffered massive injuries, suggesting deliberate, slow torture. Horrific detail. The killer, likely Splice, apparently removed his own belt and used its heavy buckle as a weapon to inflict cuts and bruises. A really vicious, personal kind of violence.
And Pyro, the arsonist, he finished the job by burning the man's shop down, destroying his livelihood, his independence, everything he'd worked for. But the final act of terror was highly performative, wasn't it? They didn't try to hide the body. They meant for him to be found, discarded like rubbish. It was a bid to systematically terrorize the whole community.
Precisely. The baker's body, still covered in the residue of his trade, the flour dust, was dumped from a boat near the customs house. right in the commercial heart of the town. Think about the psychological impact of that. The sight of a flower-covered man, beaten and discarded near the wharves, near the center of trade. It sent a clear, chilling message to all the nervous entrepreneurs trying to establish themselves in Londinium.
Comply, or you will be destroyed. This wasn't random violence, it was strategic terror, carefully designed to control the nascent economy of the town.
So while the city is grappling with this systemic terror, the personal toll on the investigators, on Falco and his circle, becomes immense. The pressure cooker environment is intensified by the sudden, really puzzling disappearance of L. Petronius Longus, Petro's Falco's close friend, and also the kind of romantic interest of Falco's sister Maya. Yeah, Petro disappeared very abruptly. He just left a rudely worded note, basically telling everyone to get lost. He took his famously well-stocked medicine chest, he was known for that, and his full armory, suggesting he was expecting trouble. But he only wore a very dirty tunic. Very odd. Initially, everyone, including Falco's sister Maya, they just assumed he'd done something reckless, maybe plunged into some sordid debauchery, or was being deliberately rebellious against his dull military postings. That was sort of his style sometimes.
But the truth when it comes out is far more critical and complex, isn't it? Falco eventually learns Petro is working deep undercover. This isn't just some local provincial investigation he stumbled into. This operation actually originated back in Ostia and Rome. It's targeting the gang leaders themselves, the top guys, who viewed Britain as a new, soft market, primarily because of his lack of a vigils presence, no proper police force. So Petro is essentially a lone vigils officer on a clandestine mission, sent from Italy itself.
He's a professional spy in a dirty tunic. He's using multiple aliases to maintain cover and deliberately throw off people like Centurion Crixus, the corrupt one, who he naturally despises on sight. When Crixus finally tracks him down near the Shower of Gold, Petro flatly denies his identity, claims to be Iximitheus, a bean importer from Spain, I think. He deliberately uses these slightly ridiculous false identities like Ninius Basilius, the feather fan seller, almost as an instinctive rebellion against any stiff in a red tunic, any official soldier who might interfere with his real clandestine operation.
And amidst all this high-stakes undercover work comes this moment of just devastating personal news, delivered with cold, brutal efficiency. While Petro is deep undercover, completely focused on breaking this organized crime ring, the procurator Hilaris receives a curt, bureaucratic message from Rome. It's intended for Petronius. It informs him that 2 of his 3 young daughters have died of chickenpox back in Italy.
The sheer horror of that message, and the fact that it was delivered so professionally, so impersonally, without any context, it's crushing. It really highlights the brutal reality of the Roman world, where high infant mortality rates meant, as Falco reflects, the empire was tragically filled with tiny tombstones, just part of life, horribly. Aelia Camilla, Falco's mother, she's particularly shocked that the message failed to specify which daughter survived, leaving this awful vacuum of complete uncertainty for whenever Petro finds out.
And Petro finally hears the news later. It's delivered, heartbreakingly, by Maya's young children, Ancus and Marius, who are naturally fretting over their missing hero figure. His reaction when he hears it just defines absolute defeat, utter devastation. He was forced to focus on his duty. He had no way of knowing they were even ill, and now this unimaginable personal price has been paid. He admits to Maya, 2 of my girls are gone. I had to know. There's nothing else for me now.
And this deep-seated sense of loss, of defeat, becomes the engine of his determination from then on. He views completing this mission as the only thing left for him. It's all he has.
Surrounding Falco, though, is this cohort of complex, really powerful women who are absolutely vital to his survival and to the investigation. First, there's Helena Justina, his companion, his partner.
Yeah.
She's from a patrician background, but deliberately throws herself into the adventure. She joins him fresh off the boat in Britain, wearing a scruffy disguise to be less conspicuous blend in, and she proves essential. She notices critical details Falco misses, like the Jupiter branding pattern on the taverns, and she acts as a necessary buffer between Falco's often abrasive methods and the political establishment like Hilaris. And later, she demonstrates absolute courage by fearlessly confronting his captors when he's taken.
Then there's Chloris, known professionally as Amazonia, Falco's former lover. She represents a totally different kind of power, of independence. She's a successful gladiatrix. She intentionally set up her all-female team here in Britain, specifically to capitalize on the new amphitheater being built in Londinium, and also, shrewdly, to avoid being hogged or controlled by the established male gladiatorial groups back in Italy. She wanted independence. But her team is itself now being pressured by the Jupiter gang to pay a cut of their earnings, which is precisely why she becomes a key, albeit legally problematic, witness against them. Gladiators were infamous, their testimony questionable in court.
And of course, there's the volatile Maia Favonia, Falco's sister. She's widowed. Her husband was famously eaten by lions in Tripolitania, a rather dramatic backstory. She's currently drawn, emotionally, both to the intense, tortured Petronius, who keeps trying to push her away for her own safety, and to the charming, cultured suspect, Norbanus Murena. Her confusion and vulnerability are deliberately exploited by Norbanus, the urbane villain. And that sets the stage for her intensely violent physical response later when she finds out she's been used.
And finally, we absolutely must spend time on Albia. The troubled young survivor, possibly orphaned during the Boudiccan rebellion years earlier, just found scavenging on the streets. Helena takes her in, gives her a bath, dresses her in a decent blue dress, and starts trying to teach her Latin, trying to give her a chance at some kind of normal life. But Falco, who's completely overwhelmed by the dual murder investigations, the rising gang violence, the threat to Petro, he reaches a breaking point. Albia, perhaps testing boundaries or just being a kid, defiantly smashes 2 decorative vases Helena had bought. In a moment of sheer frustration and exhaustion, Falco honors an ultimatum he'd rashly made. One more bit of destruction and you're back on the streets. And he actually puts her out.
The consequence is immediate and harrowing. It just highlights the terrifying vulnerability of the poor and unconnected in Londinium. Albia is instantly seized, literally grabbed off the street by the vile madam of the old neighbor brothel, a horrifying figure described by the sources memorably as a human fungus. Just awful. When Albia manages to somehow whisper a desperate plea for help through the brothel window, and it's the first time Falco or Helena have actually heard her speak properly, Falco is struck by the immediate devastating weight of his responsibility. What has he done?
He rushes in to rescue her. He ends up fighting the violent madam and her thugs with whatever weapons come to hand, brooms, eventually his own knife. It really emphasizes the difference between his sometimes cynical philosophical pronouncements and his powerful instinctive loyalty and sense of justice when it gets personal.
Yeah, this incident seems crucial because it snaps Falco back to his core purpose, maybe. He realizes that if he can't even protect the most vulnerable person he personally took responsibility for, how can he possibly protect the city from the systematic predation of the Jupiter Company? It galvanizes him.
Right. So with the emotional stakes now crystal clear, and Falco perhaps refocused, the investigation quickly narrows down the 2 main operators running the Jupiter Company. The primary one, the really vicious one, is identified as Florius. This is confirmed by the barmaid, Flavia Fronta, once Falco puts the pressure on her about the stolen torque. And Florius is confirmed as Petronius's longtime target, the one he came all the way from Ostia to catch.
Florius's backstory, his transformation, is genuinely chilling, isn't it? Falco remembers him from Rome as just a worthless and harmless hanger-on, someone who just happened to marry a gangster's daughter, Balbina Milvia, a nobody. But somehow he has transmogrified into one of the world's tight dealers, a real player. Falco knows him personally because Florius previously had him attacked back in Rome over some other case. Bad blood there.
And Petro knows him even better because Petro actually had an affair with Florius's wife Milvia, which fuels this intensely personal vendetta between the investigator and the criminal mastermind. It's not just business for either of them.
And Florius sounds like pure evil, really. He's described as a flesh peddler who personally deflowered all the young girls forced into his stable of prostitutes. He really represents the sickening intersection of organized crime and vile personal exploitation.
The second partner, the other head of the snake, is Norbanus Murena. He's identified by a lawyer named Popilius, who arrives suspiciously quickly to defend the gang's arrested heavies earlier on. Norbanus is the charming face of the operation. He poses as a property developer. He's cultured and urbane, very smooth. He publicly claims to have a grand villa somewhere outside town, but actually lives quietly, discreetly in the northern part of Londinium, significantly close to the fighting grounds and the new amphitheater. And most dangerously, as we know, he's busy manipulating Falco's sister, Maia, using charm as a weapon.
Now, because of the pervasive fear, nobody wants to testify against these guys, and the resulting lack of reliable free citizen witnesses, Governor Frontinus takes an extraordinary step. He sanctions the use of the official torturer.
Yes, this man is named Amicus, which ironically means the befriender, a classic piece of Roman bureaucratic naming, perhaps.
Amicus is a character unto himself. He's described as intelligent, methodical, professional, even slightly put out by the last-minute request, apparently. Treats it like just another job, like checking a dodgy axle on a wagon, the source says.
He works with his silent, menacing assistant, Titus, who carries this enormous bag of instruments that emits a bone-chilling clank whenever he moves. That sound alone signals the shift from judicial investigation to brute force interrogation.
And Amicus provides crucial, though somewhat conflicting, information drawn from his nurtured sources,
Hmm.
probably Pyro, the arsonist. They claim Vera Volk's death was actually an accident, that Pyro and Splice just shoved him in the well to teach him a lesson for being an amateur rival, trying to muscle in on their territory perhaps, but they didn't intend to kill him.
This confirms the gang killed him, regardless of intent, but it confuses the motive slightly. Was it planned murder or manslaughter gone wrong?
Falco maintains it was deliberate murder. This conflict really highlights the potential unreliability of information obtained through torture, even if Amicus himself is highly competent at extracting something.
And Amicus reveals something else crucial: Falco's carelessness. He confirms through his sources that Falco and Chloris were overheard discussing the entire case loudly at a bar called the Cradle in the Tree, which of course is part of the gang's network, one of the Jupiter-themed bars.
Oh no. That immediately puts Chloris, their key witness and ally, in imminent danger. Florius now knows she's talking to Falco.
Exactly. Falco knows he has to warn her immediately. He finds her practicing at the newly built amphitheater with her team of female gladiators. They're preparing for the upcoming games. Just as Falco arrives, Florius shows up, shaven-headed, arrogant, flanked by his bodyguards. He's come to personally pressure Chloris into paying a cut to his operation. He's spoiling for a fight, trying to intimidate her in front of her own troop.
And this is where the story just gets absolutely chaotic and spectacular. Petronius makes his dramatic appearance. Petro had apparently positioned himself nearby, maybe anticipating trouble or shadowing Florius. And in a moment of inspired lunacy or perhaps tactical genius, he uses a partially tamed, massive Caledonian bear, which was apparently chained up nearby, maybe part of the amphitheater menagerie against Florius.
The sheer spectacle is unforgettable. The bear apparently lunges, nearly tears Florius's face off. It causes immediate chaos and panic among Florius's bodyguards. They scatter, and this enables the fight to truly erupt.
The battle is joined. Chloris and her team of highly trained female gladiators fight Florius's street thugs, his heavies, and they demonstrate incredible skill, discipline, and determination. They prove they are far more capable warriors than these gangsters.
The chaos is total. You've got the bear rampaging, the gladiators fighting expertly, and then, adding to the mayhem, unexpected allies appear. A group of northern horsemen, maybe allies of Chloris, or just enjoying the brawl, ride in circles, harrying the disorganized gangsters, cutting off escape routes.
Splice, the surviving enforcer, the brute who tortured the baker. He crashes the arena in a chariot he commandeered somewhere, attempting this reckless, dramatic attack, only to be intercepted and killed quite decisively by the gladiators' northern allies, a fitting end for him. Meanwhile, Florius himself is actually captured by Chloris, held white-faced and gibbering, reduced back to the worthless hanger-on he used to be, momentarily stripped of his power.
However, the chaotic scene, which is exacerbated by a sudden, intense downpour of rain turning the arena floor to mud, allows Florius to slip away. He uses red legionary uniforms, soldiers' tunics supplied by the corrupt centurion Crixus, as a perfect disguise in the confusion. He manages to escape the amphitheater and get away by boat, heading upriver on the Temessus.
In this moment, Crixus supplying the uniforms. It confirms the systemic vulnerability we talked about right at the start. Rome's own military structure is corruptible, exploitable by organized crime right here on the frontier. Crixus betrayed his own side for money. Okay, so the big fish, Florius, gets away. But the chaos doesn't end there, does it? The gang tries one last desperate trap. They lure Petronius into a final exchange. They claim they have Maya hostage and offer to trade her for something, maybe safe passage for themselves. They use a decoy hostage, a prostitute dressed in red, vaguely resembling Maya in the gloom.
Petro realizes the trap almost immediately, but too late to back out without endangering others. He notes the woman had roughly the right height but the wrong build, the wrong walk entirely for Maya. He knows it's fake. But he goes willingly anyway. He seems determined to sacrifice himself, perhaps to guarantee the safety of Falco, Helena, and Maya, or maybe just because he feels he has nothing left to lose after the news about his daughters.
He's taken to the warehouse Florius had been using as a secret headquarters. And there, he's hung by chains attached to a heavy timber crate acting as a counterweight. Suspended near death in this brutal act of personal revenge by Florius's remaining men, designed to prolong his suffering before he dies.
Falco and Helena, thankfully, manage to follow or figure out where he's been taken. They find him just in time. Using a coil of rope they find, and crucially, the necessary strength of a friendly, uninvolved soldier who happens to be nearby, they manage to stabilize the counterweight system just as the chain holding Petro is about to jerk free and likely kill him. A very close call.
Right, so Petro is saved. Now, let's tick off the fate of the villains. What happens to the rest of the Jupiter company?
Okay, Pyro, the arsonist. He was poisoned while in custody, likely by Florius's remaining loyalists who were terrified he would talk under Amicus's persuasion, silenced permanently.
Slice, the brutalizer.
Killed dramatically in the amphitheater chaos by Chloris's allies. Taken out during the fight.
And Norbanus Marina, the charming property developer.
He was captured later, trying to slip away perhaps, down at the customs house. Fitting place. And he remained completely urbane to the end, denying all charges, coolly invoking the law, and immediately using the promise of high-powered lawyers to defend him. Relying entirely on the Roman legal system he was subverting to protect him from the consequences.
But this is where Maia's personal vendetta comes to a violent, very definitive head. She confronts Norbanus, probably while he's under guard, and she just rejects any political or legal maneuvering. She physically beats him with her fists, for manipulating her, for using her feelings, for endangering Petronius.
The blows are described as swinging from the shoulder like she was beating dust out of a carpet. Just raw fury. Leaving the cultured, smooth Norbanus completely taken by surprise, battered and humiliated. It's a moment of visceral, raw justice that the courts perhaps would never deliver.
So, despite these captures, the ultimate target, Florius, escapes. He gets away by boat upriver, loaded with significant loot presumably, and disguised in that red legionary uniform provided by the corrupt centurion Crixus. This escape really is the critical failure of the whole operation, isn't it?
Yeah.
The mastermind gets away clean.
It is, from a purely procedural point of view. But the personal drama, that compels the investigators forward. Petronius, despite his immense trauma and exhaustion or, the loss of his children, his own near-death experience, he is somehow galvanized by it all. He immediately starts planning his pursuit. He secures imperial post-service, passes the diploma for himself, for Maia, and even for her children. He's planning to follow Florius back to Ostia, back to Rome if necessary, determined to finish his mission personally and professionally. It's unfinished business.
Tragically, though, there is one more death to account for in the aftermath. Chloris.
Yes. Chloris died in the amphitheater fight. Her death is attributed directly to Florius's gang during the melee, which robs Falco not only of a friend and ally, but also of his most valuable witness against Florius, given her infamous status probably wouldn't have held up in court anyway without corroboration.
And her burial is significant too, isn't it?
Very. She is buried outside the main cemetery perimeter, pointedly near the future site of the Old Bailey, London's Central Criminal Court, interestingly enough. This reflects her status as an outcast gladiator. Legally infamous, shunned by the traditional Roman cemetery customs.
Her funeral itself, though, is described as a moment of somber reflection. It's conducted as an antique, peculiarly northern ritual, perhaps reflecting her or her troops' origins.
Her body is burned on an elaborate bustum pyre constructed from meticulously laid pine logs. Accompanied by her personal treasures, weapons, armor, maybe insignificantly, Helena's blue stole, which Helena places on the pyre as a mark of respect and friendship.
It feels like a moment of deep understanding, that the outcasts like Chloris and her companions, they actually stood for skill, talent, and good faith in this story. A profound contrast to the criminals and the corrupt elements of the establishment they fought against.
So, ultimately, the investigation is only a partial victory, isn't it? The two murders are technically solved. Vera Vulcus killed by Pyro and Splice on Floris's order, even if Amicus's sources called it an accident after the torque was stolen. And Epaphroditus definitely tortured and killed by Splice on Florius's orders. However, the lead gangster, Florius, has escaped. The chief witness, Chloris, is dead, rendering her testimony inadmissible anyway. And the other key witness, Flavia Fronta, the barmaid. She's exposed as a thief and a liar after the ancient torque is found hidden in the tavern wall, meaning the case against Florius, should they ever catch him, relies on shaky, circumstantial testimony. It's messy.
But personal resolution is achieved, to some extent. And maybe that's more important in this context than the strict legal outcome.
Perhaps. Petronius, having faced the absolute depths of his loss and his own near death, finally seems to accept Maia's companionship, her support. Falco sees them finally bonding properly, their shared trauma and experience overriding all the past volatility and misunderstandings between them.
And the vulnerability of Albia, the little scavenger girl, remains unresolved in a way. She's still scarred by her experiences, but Helena and Falco explicitly take her under their protection. They offered to take her away from Britain entirely, away from the cycle of exploitation she nearly fell back into.
And this act of personal responsibility, taking care of Albia, it contrasts sharply with the state's systemic failure to protect its most vulnerable citizens in Londinium.
So, what does this entire deep dive reveal about Londinium in AD 75?
Well, I think it shows pretty clearly that the veneer of Roman civilization was paper thin here, maybe just barely painted on. Governor Frontinus intended this new province to be a beacon of Roman law and order, a showcase. Yet it became fertile ground for sophisticated Roman criminals who applied systematic, almost modern methods of terror and exploitation. The local law enforcement, such as it was just not up to the task. The military was stretched thin, often incompetent at policing, and dangerously corrupted by men like Centurion Crixus.
So, what does this all mean for the future of the province, looking forward from AD 75? It took two outsiders, an auditor, Falco, who was essentially just visiting, maybe on holiday initially, and a lone, grieving vigilance officer, Petro, on a secret mission fueled by this potent mix of political duty and intensely personal vendetta just to temporarily break the ring. But the ultimate target, Florius, slips away, which demonstrated how easily organized crime could use the empire's vastness, its communication delays, its bureaucratic failures against itself.
I think the most profound insight here remains that contrast. The contrast between the official history from Frontinus building monuments, planning forums, writing treatises on aqueducts, and the messy, painful personal history we see unfolding. Petronius grieving his two lost daughters while simultaneously hunting a gangster across the empire. That's the reality. Maybe the real foundation of this new province isn't its empty forum or its permanent temporary bridge, but actually the personal loyalties, the friendships, and the sheer stubborn resilience of men and women like Falco, Helena, Petro, Maiae, even Chloris, who fought to hold the line against corruption and terror when the system failed them.
So here's a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. Think about the escaping Florius. Described as a tight dealer, someone who had mastered the Roman systems of law, finance, and logistics, a true dark entrepreneur in the worst sense. He fled disguised in the uniform of the state he betrayed, taking the spoils with him, heading back towards the heart of the empire. If Londinium, the supposed jewel of the new province, is so structurally vulnerable to sophisticated Roman-style organized crime in AD 75, what does that say about the true, enduring, and maybe ongoing cost of civilizing the frontier?
It suggests perhaps that the chaos of empire isn't just something faced externally at the borders. Sometimes it's baked right into the foundations from the very beginning.